Welcome to Collapse Club, where we consider the question, how are we to live in the time of collapse? I'm David Baum in Seattle. Today with me are Dr. Kate Booth and Tristan Sykes from Just Collapse in Australia. Hello and welcome.
Hello, David. Thank you for having us.
Hi, David.
Thank you for joining me. I'd like to start kind of at the end. One of the points of your program is a planned collapse. And I just want to ask, isn't that an oxymoron? Doesn't collapse imply chaos and uncontrollability? What can it mean to plan a collapse?
Well, planning it's a big idea, planning, but nuts and bolts of it, I guess, the idea of planning is preparation as a way of achieving some kind of goals. So in our contemporary societies, we're very used to planning on the up, that things are going to get better, that we can do things, we can do preparation to help improve life. And what Just Collapse is doing is developing ideas. We're relatively new, so we're still working on a lot of ideas, but developing ideas for planning on the down. What can we do? What preparation can we do? What outcomes can we realistically achieve during what you accurately identify as a chaotic collapse? Yeah.
So if I could just add to that, so our contention is that whilst collapse is inevitable, according to the evidence that Overshoot would suggest, that you can either have a planned collapse or it will be reactive. People will have to react to the instant. There will be no organisation around that collapse, and so you get less than ideal circumstances that result from the fallout.
Yeah, I think a key point to understanding the idea of planning in collapse is that collapse is a process, not a switch. It's not like we wake up one morning and everything's gone. You know, this is an ongoing process. We're in the middle of collapse now. It's already started. There are lots of warning signs there. Many of us are yet to hit the really desperate end of that, but it's a process, and we're unsure at the moment in terms of how long it will take and that kind of time frame. But because it's a process, there is an opportunity. There are so many opportunities to do things within that.
Yeah,
I see.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of...
You would just switch off, and that
I'm
would
very
be...
sorry. I'm sorry. Let's start again. You go and I'll wait.
No, I apologize, David. Yes, I was just going to reiterate that if it was a light switch, it would just switch off one day and we would have no need to look for any justice in that context. But because it's not like a light switch, collapse is an unfolding process. That's why we need to look at the issue of justice in this context. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I beg your pardon. I get it now. The current society is still captured by the dream of growth and is therefore in denial about what is coming. And we need to puncture that denial in order to prevent the worst outcomes that we are looking forward to in a collapse scenario.
Precisely.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good summary. And in some ways, I think it's also a little bit more complicated than denial. Like many people in the West, not everybody, but many people, our lives are continuing. There is this feeling of comfort and continuance. And in that kind of context, there's kind of this cognitive dissonance in terms of talking about collapse and that reality that's currently unfolding. If people aren't more broadly aware of the science or events in faraway places, or they're not interpreting issues like supply chain issues that are currently happening in many Western countries, if they're not interpreting that within a broader understanding of the interconnectivity of global systems and processes.
I see. So you think there are people who are simply unaware that we are in the process of collapse on a global scale?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are lots of people who are unaware. Many people are aware. I've run into people who they've sort of got an inkling, like that it's not something that they've voiced or they don't really talk about it with their friends, right? But they've got a feeling that somehow none of this is right. They don't know quite how to articulate it. They don't have the language for it. That's something, you know, obviously that we're trying to develop is a way of talking about collapse. And that's our main campaign at the moment, is to talk collapse, because we believe that people have a right to know. We think that without understanding the nature of our predicament, any action potentially becomes maladaptive.
Mm. And just picking up on that point of denial, there are definitely people who definitely don't want to know. They have access to all the information, and it's very difficult for them, for understandable reasons, to internalize that and make that part of their everyday life. Yeah.
How do we help people talk about collapse and accept that that is the period that we're living in now?
Yeah, it's never going to be easy. I think we need to be really honest and straightforward with people. I think that's the best approach. Like you would expect, if you are unfortunate enough to have a doctor give you a terminal diagnosis. That sort of, you would expect your doctor to give it to you straight, to let you know what the situation was and what your options are, so you can consider your options within those circumstances. And for some people, that shock will result in denial. It will result in anger. It's all the stages of the Kubler-Ross model will, likely play out and do play out. And I get depressed, I get angry, I also have acceptance, but those things fluctuate. I don't live in a permanent state of, so I don't expect other people to either. I just think that we have to communicate honestly with them and allow them to go through the process, but they have the right to know.
One of the consequences that you identify of an unplanned collapse or ignoring the problem is injustice. Could you talk about what you fear to see if we don't start paying attention now to the inevitable collapse that we face?
A key idea, as far as that I'm aware of, is that the more equitable a society is, the more just a society is, the fairer a society is, the more robust it is in tackling big, complex changes and issues. So for us, that idea of justice starts now, working for a more equitable society, and then continues on through the process of collapse, because without that, justice that occurs during the various dimensions of collapse will be by luck alone, not by design. So what we're aiming for, what we're arguing for, what needs to happen, is that justice has to be front of mind. We need to be striving for equitable relationships from the get-go, all the way through, as much as we can. So we've talked a lot about this because some people misinterpret the idea of a just collapse as similar to a just transition. We're just perhaps using a more a stronger word, but we're still talking about collapse. It will be collapse, but we're arguing justice must be front of mind in there.
Yes, and some people misinterpret justice and think we mean some sort of punitive retribution, which we do not mean at all. We mean equity and yes. Sorry, David.
So a commitment to equity will not prevent collapse, but it can have a benefit during the process of collapse. What benefits do you see to equity as things go to chaos around us?
Yeah. Well, our contention is that an unplanned collapse, has any justice occurs by luck rather than by design. And look, I would just reiterate that the first measure of justice is the knowing of the predicament. I can't stress that highly enough, and this is why we're saying that we need to be talking collapse, and why things like your channel that you've developed are so important. Because if we're not talking collapse, then people don't have that knowledge of the predicament, even if they choose to respond with denial or anger or what. But at least they have the opportunity as a first matter of justice to be able to determine how they will respond within that context. And only a collapse conscious citizenry can plan for a just collapse. How that planning takes place, we're not going to sit here on our little island and dictate the nature of how people in South America or Africa or Europe or how anybody goes about their planning. That's particular. That will need to be particular to their culture and to the specifics of their ecosystems and environment. And those measures, any justice will be found in that context.
Yeah, and one of the privileges we have at the moment in some parts of the world is that we can identify already what's coming. So we know things like food shortages, water shortages, potentially, as Tristan says, different in different places, mass migration pressures as people are forced to move. So we can start thinking through some of those things now. We have this opportunity now that we can grasp. But as Tristan says, people need to be collapse aware to start that process. So the first point of justice for just collapse is talking about collapse and raising that awareness and contributing to building a collapse conscious citizenry that can act and plan for collapse.
I see. I hear from you a great concern for the well-being of the masses of people who are unaware of what we are facing. And the first step that you're talking about is simply making it part of the conversation, bringing it up, giving people the power to think about these things by accepting that they're true.
Yeah, that's right, David. That's step one. Very much step one.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of what is true, I believe that you are adherents of the Overshoot school of thinking. I have my own understanding, but I'll ask you. You say, I believe, that Overshoot makes collapse inevitable. Could you talk about why that's true, please?
Well, Overshoot's been around for a long time. It's established peer-reviewed science. It's accepted. It's accepted that it's a thing. What it describes is the biocapacity of an area, in this case, the planet, which is our context, that there's a biocapacity, a carrying capacity of the planet, and it has resources which it regenerates over a year. And when the human enterprise, as some people call it, Homo Colossus, this extraordinary global modern industrial techno-industrial civilization, has been growing and growing and using more and more resources each year, and more than the planet can actually regenerate in any given year. By ecological footprint analysis, this is deemed at now approaching 1.8 planets per year of consumption, extraction, exploitation. And when you've been in this situation of overshoot for nearly 50 years, you've degraded. What happens is the longer you stay in overshoot above the carrying capacity of the planet, the more you degrade the carrying capacity, the biocapacity of the planet. And so the ecosystems that you're relying on to sustain this ever-growing modern global techno-industrial civilization become diminished. And so, of course, you can't continue infinite growth on a finite planet. And the biocapacity is being diminished to such an extent that the down becomes a very long way down. And that's why even if we were to return to the limits of one planet, using the whole planet's worth of resources that are able to be regenerated in 1 year, that would require a reduction of 0.8 of our entire global techno-industrial civilization. And that in itself, just to return to that place, would be collapse. But unfortunately, it's worse than that, because we've degraded the biocapacity of our planet really significantly. And so we're a long way south of that point.
So we have treated the planet so badly for so long that we've damaged it. We've hurt our home. We've damaged the Earth system, and it can no longer support even what used to be a reasonable level of human enterprise. So we're looking at a much contracted human enterprise in the long term, is what I think I hear you saying.
Yeah, and it's getting worse all the time. So the climate change impacts that have happened to date are now out of our control. So even if we ended fossil fuel use tomorrow, climate change will continue and will continue to degrade that carrying capacity. So as a planet, we've ended up in a diabolical situation where any agency we did have is being rapidly diminished because of a diminished planet. And there's also another side to overshoot, and that is the ability of the planet to absorb pollution and waste as well. So that's another side of it. So the microplastics that are polluting our waters, our soils, our ecosystems, our bodies is another element, as well as other pollutants as well, that has meant that we've been in overshoot now for 50 years. And as Tristan said, as a concept, this idea has been around for roughly 50 years if you take it back to the Limits of Growth that was published 50 years ago. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like we are really in trouble. It really sounds like we've got ourselves in a bad situation. And if you look around the world, to me, it looks like the business as usual culture, the modern world paradigm, whatever you want to call it, is very well entrenched. How do you get up in the morning when you look at this disaster? What is it that gives you the impetus to get out of bed?
There's lots to do, of course. So we're passionate about there being something to do. Many people argue that just because the nature of our predicament is as severe as it is, that in fact there is nothing to do. But in fact, I would argue that the opposite is true. It is because of the dire nature of our predicament that there is so much to do. So that's one reason to get up in the morning. The other is that for me, life is, I mean, I'm relatively inured. I'm a poor person in the relative wealth of Australia, but nonetheless, I find great satisfaction living my little my tiny footprint existence, and I think a dark sense of humor, a gallows humor, is vital. As you've got to laugh. You've got to laugh. It's very important.
Yes.
Yeah.
It does surprise some people, the dark humour that comes with being collapse aware. But yeah, we have a lot of laughs. But yeah. But also Tristan and I both come from activist backgrounds that span decades, and I'll let Tristan tell his story, but I grew up learning about ecology and ecological limits and the harm that some humans were doing to the planet, largely in the West. I had a lovely upbringing, and it was steeped in this ecological knowledge in the Lake District in the UK, one of the iconic, natural environments in the Western world, but aware during my childhood of the nuclear threat, the military doing flying planes at low level on practice exercises through the Lake District, radiation from Chernobyl blowing over Europe and farming communities. So in some ways, it's this predicament that we're in now does not come as a shock, never came as a shock to me. I knew that there was this possibility. I've known this since I was quite young, that this possibility would eventuate. Always hoping, always working for a different outcome or different outcomes. But I read Collapse by Jared Diamond a few decades ago. I tried to read it. It gave me nightmares because I recognised it was real, not a fantasy story. And I reassured myself for quite a while, saying, okay, this might happen, but it's not going to happen in the next 10 years. And I've reached the situation now where I can't reassure myself like that anymore. So I'm driven by anger to a significant extent. It's not kind of furious anger, because that dissipates, you can't maintain that, but it's this absolute determination to stand up for what's right and not go down without a fight. That's my motivation, I guess.
Yeah, Kate raised the nuclear issue. I think it's really important. We're Cold War kids. That's the sort of generation that we both come from, and the book, I suppose, if you were going to trace it back, I think was called "When the Wind Blows." I think it was called. It was I was little. I was about 10, and there was this illustrated book of this elderly couple surviving a nuclear war, and it was just like a little cartoon book. And I suppose I became aware of the potential for mutually assured destruction, which is a lot more like a switch than the collapse of modern techno-industrial civilization. But it could go that way, of course. And we've been incredibly lucky to have avoided it as many times, rather by luck than by design. We have narrowly avoided mutually assured destruction. So, like Kate, I've sort of grown up with the notion of collapse for so long that, again, it didn't come. Yes, when I became aware of infinite growth on a finite planet, which was became very obvious around me in Noosa, an iconic Australian area. Natural area. When I became aware, seeing all the subdevelopments and how quickly our little town was growing, I became aware that infinite growth on a finite planet was a thing, and I couldn't see how it was ever going to stop. So that, combined with awareness of mutually assured destruction, was sort of my awakening to collapse.
Thank you for that. I too started being concerned about nuclear weapons when I realized at a certain point, the age of 15 or something, there are 10,000 of these weapons are on the world. And that makes no sense. That's just insane. That's an inhuman fact. And then the constant worry, when you go out the front door, is this the last time that I'll see my home because of this bizarre, arbitrary engine of destruction that could be loosed at any moment? It's absurd. It was crazy. It changes the way you think about the world. And I appreciate your distinction between that being a more or less instantaneous end to things and collapse, which could be many decades, or at least many years, depending on what your forecasting is like. Before we go on, excuse me, I'd like to welcome the people who are watching who have made comments. Kirk Hall made a nice comment. He runs the group Degrowth Join the Revolution. We also have a comment from Brenton from Adelaide, and Compost John has joined us. I'm going to be making technical changes, so soon we will all be able to see the comments, but it's not there yet today. So thank you to the people who have joined us today. It's lovely to meet you. We are getting to the end of our time. I hope this will not be the last time we talk. To end today, what's tomorrow look like, or next week for you? What's top of mind? What do you have in your hands that you're going forward with right now?
At the moment, we're doing some work unpacking and exploring the idea of planning, speaking to one of your earlier questions today, and doing some writing around the idea of what's called insurgent planning, which is basically the grassroots of communities taking control of their own agendas and decision-making processes to plan for collapse. So that's what I'm focused on in collaboration with Tristan. What are you up to?
Oh, and yeah, and also, as I reiterate it yet again, that's talking collapse. This is the vital campaign at the moment. So we are trying to get more conversations like you're having with such a range of people. We're trying to have those conversations and inspire other people to have those conversations with their family, with their friends, in their workplaces, and in their communities. So that's the notion of that's the Talk Collapse campaign, because if we don't have that collapse conscious citizenry, then there won't be any planned collapse, and there will only be a reactive and unjust one.
Well, thank you for that. I think we're on the same team. I think raising consciousness, engaging with people, and giving them some terms with which to speak about this is a valuable mission at this time.
Yeah, thanks, David.
All right, then. Thank you so very much. And thank you to everyone. Hold on. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you for being with me. This is Collapse Club. Until we meet again, farewell.